Morning all. Again, let's have a look at the other Petrosian Fischer encounter from that 1970 match, which was a decisive one. So Fischer playing black against Tigran. So c4. It's going to like positionally crush Fischer with the English opening. So Petrosian's going for that strategic grip on d5, and he combines that with a queenside advanced plan, which is the sort of thing I would sometimes play as well. d3, not wanting to play d4, which is well, it's restricted at the moment. Black's restricting d4 anyway. So the queenside advance plan, starting with bishop d2. So there's ideas like a3, b4. So what's Fischer got in line to counter this? Well, he actually first plays d5. Now this is interesting because he's sort of anticipating a3 and b4, that this pawn might be vulnerable later. So d5 will strike at that pawn, kind of help trying to get it isolated, and then restrained, blockaded, and eliminated in that kind of in those kind of stages. So if a3 b4 is going to happen, then black, having the option of d takes c4, is going to go for c4. So let's see, a3 and now b6. Okay, as though the fianchetto just to oppose this bishop as well. Rook b1, bishop b7. Okay, so Petrosian's going for the space now on the queen side. And if you can play b takes c5, that would be a great advantage, I think. But this change of pawn structure here, c takes, a takes, it just seems to be c4 is like the Achilles heel which Fischer's identified here. Okay, so he takes it now on c4 and plays rook c8. So we have a hint that there's a tactical problem here. For example, b5 knight a5 shows that this pawn's now vulnerable. Okay, so does Petrosian really want to play c5? Well, he does so, and Fischer takes, and it's restrained there, but is it dangerous? Is it marking key squares? Knight a5, so the knight might even come into that c4 square for knight c4 to be annoying, and then something, knight takes d2 would be particularly annoying because that dark square bishop doesn't want to be left unchallenged. But here knight a4 is played. Okay, so knight a4, actually knight c4 is not at all possible anyway at the moment. Rook takes b7. So Fischer moves it out of the way, and maybe he's actually now really creating this threat. Knight c4 now. It's parried, but also this knight's under pressure on a4. If Fischer can play queen d7, he'll have a battery on the a4 knight, which hasn't got b6 at the moment because of that pawn. So queen c2. Alright, maybe the queen wants to move, but at the moment the knight's under fire. So Fischer cleverly plays knight b7. I say cleverly because now he's getting all the advantages without the disadvantages of all this manoeuvring. He can put pressure freely on a4 next. But b7 might also be a problem to consider. So it's not so easy to try and target Black's queenside initiative here. It's notable, Fischer hasn't attempted to create any kingside counterplay with moves like e5 and f5. His kingside's totally solid here. All he's doing is tactically trying to fight on the queenside, it seems, at the moment. Try and prove a vulnerability, like this pawn in particular is the most stationary target. So rook fc1. It looks as though, pleasant position for white superficially here. And indeed, maybe actually technically it is. If white plays the perfect moves, maybe c5 wouldn't have been a bad thing. Okay, so queen d7. So is Petrosian going to move the knight? No, he doesn't. A clever move, knight e1. So if bishop a4, I think there's rook takes b7. Well, I checked this variation anyway earlier with Rybka. So rook takes b7, and this kind of sequence, white will be okay. So in the game, after knight e1, which introduces like this pressure on b7, Fischer actually plays knight d5, so he's shielding that diagonal now. If white plays e4, that's even more weaknesses, potentially on the dark squares. He doesn't really want to play a move like e4. And in fact, here, bishop takes a4 would actually lose a piece anyway, so forget e4 as an idea. Okay, the knight has to move, it's under fire. So knight b2, okay. And now we have significant pressure building up on c5 after this next move, bishop b5. So the rook and knight are now targeting c5. Bishop's nicely on that diagonal, because this diagonal is with that bishop. But what about this diagonal? Slight weakness as well in the white position. Okay, so knight ed3, shielding that diagonal. And here's the naughty little move, trying to steal a pawn from Petrosian's queenside initiative. It's not as if Fischer has created a counterplay on the kingside. He's just playing around, trying to nitpick, basically, Petrosian's counterplay on the queenside. And he does so now with a nice, seemingly nice tactical move. I'm not sure it should have worked out, though, as it did. He sneaked this in, bishop d4. Okay, he's coordinating pieces, yes, against this poor pawn. But Petrosian's next move, I think, might have been a major blunder, queen b3. I think he has to let the pawn go and go for the compensation. He has to play dynamically here. Rybka's giving this as a nice move for white, knight c4. So let's see, okay, so knight takes c5. If Fischer snatches the pawn here, you see knight c4 supports knight d e5. And then we've got a problem because of knight d6. So the queen, has to defend. So if it went to e8, then there's knight d6. And I think this is going to be better for white. Let's just engine check this. I did briefly earlier, but this position would be fine, I think, for white. There's adequate compensation. So say bishop a4, knight takes d7, bishop takes queen, knight takes f8, bishop takes b1. Now here there'll be a desperado, knight takes e6. Okay, so knight takes e6. Now bishop takes d5, bishop a2. I think we can forgive both players for not seeing this variation. White's just slightly better here. Now, in this position, if there wasn't bishop takes d5, well, rook takes b1 is rook takes c4. So that's also actually no. This is also okay. Rook takes c4 is wrong here. Knight b6. Or knight c3, but white's still slightly better here according to Rybka. So it's a bit of a tactical mess here, but this is the more dynamic move, it would seem. Knight c4. That would be a very difficult move, to just turning it into a kind of gambit based on knight e5. Let's look at this again. Any other moves here? So queen e8, there's knight d6. Queen e7, you just lose a piece. Rook takes b5. Okay, so Petrosian misses that. Okay, so he goes down, it seems silently, a pawn down from his queenside initiative. Fischer's just nicked a pawn, and he's starting to simplify the position, dragging it to an endgame almost. So he just needs to get queens off, and it's going to start looking like an endgame position, a pawn down, with black having the outside a pawn as a runner. So e5. Knight b6, and now Fischer's also starting to seize the c-file. He's systematically building up a c-file advantage now, so doubling up with those heavy artillery on the c-file, and now dragging the pawn forward to a5. It offers nice squares, and the knight's dancing around here against this bishop. This bishop's got nothing to attack. It's got no exploitable weaknesses at all. Fischer's keeping his pawns here on dark squares, improving his king safety now. So now the queen's come off. Now we really have got an ending where Petrosian, with his initiative on the queen side, just been taking the mickey out of just Fischer winning a pawn, just simplifying it to this endgame. It's kind of incredible in its own way, really. So check, rook c1. Now there's a very clever bit coming up here. So Fischer's advancing this a pawn, and he positively invites a tactic from white here with rook a2, because he's got this dangerous a pawn, and I don't know if this is like a men's calculation, but rook a2, how does white defend this? He can't, but he has got this tactic available to him, which he employs now which is rook takes f7. So it simplifies it even further to a knight versus bishop endgame. So bishop c4 check, picking up the rook again. Okay, so let's take stock of this position. After all that, Fischer's absolutely dead equal on material, but this a pawn is apparently a winning advantage in his position, because this knight can come and herd it a bit more forward. The bishop's helpless here. The king's too far away, maybe. So a3. So the king comes in, f3, then no, knight f6. King e3, as though the king might be stepping over to get to that pawn. But the black king's also very active, king d6. So f4. Fischer plays knight d7 now. So holding up e5. Bishop b1. Now knight c5. So what's going on here? Potentially there's knight a4 to c3, or knight a6 to b4. Then a2 will be supported. So Petrosian tries to create a pass pawn of his own, f5. But Fischer plays knight a6. He's carrying on. He's trying to just get a2 in. So g4, and now knight b4. It seems Fischer's just winning that bishop now. But will he have... He's having to cope with his king side. Is it going to be in time? fg, fg. Pass outside h pawn to balance black's a pawn, perhaps. G takes. But now king e6. The king stepped in the square. In other words, h6, king f7, h7, king g7. The king to the rescue. Okay, it's not going over here. This knight's going to win this bishop. It's just this pawn, can it be grabbed by white? That's the last question to be answered. And it's apparent now, in this position, knight b4, king c3, knight c6, that everything is all okay after knight d4. Because if king d5, there's knight f3, protecting the e5 pawn, and white would have to waste lots of time chasing the knight. It would just move, but by that time this pawn will be gobbled, and this king's just going to go to f4 eventually. So so that's it really. Petrosian had enough. It's a naughty game. I can only describe it as a naughty game, because black really nitpicked his, Fischer nitpicked Petrosian's counterplay. Not as if he didn't, but to create counterplay on the king side involves correcting weaknesses. So in a way, this was a very solid game by black, just nitpicking the queen side counterplay, and see the c4 pawn or square in particular at various points. But there is one question about it: if white could have successfully turned it into a positional kind of gambit. So on the very verge of Fischer winning the pawn here with bishop d4, this required maybe knight c4 to be played rather than the game continuation. So trying to expose the queen and bishop as a tactical kind of vulnerability, from knight a5. But this queen b3, I mean, maybe this was also an attempt to generate some compensation, but it just didn't seem to exist here. So after knight d3, Fischer just took on d3, and it still seems just, black is a pawn up. Okay, white's temporarily got the bishop pair, not anymore though after that. And this outside passed a pawn combined with the c file allows Fischer to start increasing his advantages. So this endgame is interesting for this tactic, which is invited, positive for the invited. I mean, this is great insight. This is great long-term insight that this a pawn really is going to be as effective as it might look, combined with the knight trying to push it to a2, okay, to win that bishop. So black's just in time getting into the square of that pawn, and so winning that bishop, and then just in time coming back with the knight to protect e5. So with this knight f3 now possible with king d5. So that was an interesting game. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.